All right, the session you've all been waiting for, or not, depending on your point of view. Deliverability Ask Us. And so my name is Brian Westnedge. I look after alliances and partnerships for Sift. We're a cybersecurity company. I started my career in email and deliverability a little over 20 years ago at a small company back then called Return Path, one of the first deliverability monitoring companies. Met Matt Vernhout shortly after, which is weird because I always thought you were like in your 30s, but apparently you're older than I remember, or I'm older than I remember. But deliverability has been around a long time now, actually. It's hard to believe. And I think we're really fortunate today to have a great group of deliverability experts with us. There's a lot of folks in the room with us today. We were at the largest gathering of deliverability professionals, I would say, in the world, called the Messaging, Mobile, and Malware Anti-Abuse Working Group this week. That's quite a mouthful, but it's a working group comprised of brands, mailbox providers like the folks that spoke earlier, and deliverability professionals at email service providers. And we're going to take a lot of the expertise from that room, from what we learned this week, and we'll ask the panel some great questions. So with that, I'll ask my panel to introduce themselves briefly, and then I'll kick us off.
I'm LB. I've been in deliverability.
Half the people can't hear you.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think I usually need it, but I'm LB. I've been in deliverability since 2018. I've worked with numerous billion+ a month senders, but also senders who I joke like to have me hand deliver their mail. So very small volumes, everything in between. I really enjoy the challenges in the deliverability space, and that it's this ever fluctuating ecosystem, and that it really brushes up against cybersecurity, which is one of my passions as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lauren Meyer. I've been in email for about 18 years, not to date myself, but I've worked with a lot of different brands, like, lots of like Fortune 100, 500 companies, as well as affiliate marketing. I used to work for affiliate marketers, so I've kind of run the gamut in terms of understanding the difference between like different types of list quality and practices, and understanding that deliverability is not something that you can just shrug off because you are a big sender. Yeah, I guess that's me. I'm currently the chief marketing officer for a company called SocketLabs.
Hey, I'm David O'Sullivan. I work at Attentive currently, been in deliverability a bit over a decade. Kind of wear all the hats: operations, compliance, consulting. These days I'm mostly focused on e-commerce and B2C sending.
Great. So several decades of deliverability experience out there that we're going to tap into today. I always think of deliverability as, the core tenet is send email that people want to receive. It sounds simple, right? The devil is always in the details, but deliverability is an art and a science. The science is complying with things like Google and Yahoo's sender requirements, implement SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, make it easy for your recipients to unsubscribe, keep your lists clean, remove inactives, keep your complaint rates low, things like that. That's kind of the science. And then the art is, how do you send email that people want to receive and make your campaigns relevant, of course. So we'll dive into all of that. This is Ask Us Anything, so please do raise your hands. I have a few topics to kick us off, but please do chime in where you can. So my first question for the panel is Brat Summer over?
Absolutely not.
Okay, all right, good.
Yes, I had to look up what Brat Summer was because I'm old enough that I
Well,
So it's over. It's been over.
okay. I have a teenage daughter, so that's the only reason I know. What's coming out of the conference we're at this week? Were there any learnings at Mod that you could take out that were potentially new or hadn't heard before? Did we go any deeper on any topics that interest you? Maybe LB, was there anything off the top of your head that really stood out?
Just as a reminder, Mod, you can't name names or Mod, don't mention anyone's name.
Thank you, Matt.
That's a policy from Mod.
General learnings, perhaps?
Yes, that's
No names.
no names, general learnings. Thanks. I don't want any of you to get in trouble.
I think for me, it was a lot of confirmation of, it was a lot of confirmation of things I had suspected already, as far as, really what I heard from a lot of the mailbox providers is that, cybersecurity threats are some of the biggest things that they're concerned about. Like, as far as, I think even the discussion that we had, starting the day talking about like having all the links in the email aligned, having all of, having DMARC alignment, all of that. And that is key to identification, which that makes it easier for spam filters to essentially to filter between legitimate and illegitimate mail or anything like that. I think that's kind of been my advice to senders for a while. If you're a legitimate sender, make it easy for the spam filters to identify that that is legitimate mail that you are intentionally trying to send, because there's 0 point hiding. And honestly, I will go farther than what Tobias said. If your ESP does not support HTTPS branded link tracking, run screaming now.
All right, so I guess the key takeaway that I have is just, I've been going to these conferences for many years, and I feel like a long time ago there was just this very large, maybe an electrical fence between senders and receivers. And now I feel like we're actually to the point where people are truly trying to work together, like the mailbox providers, they rolled out Google and Yahoo rolled out those requirements, so they're trying to help the folks who are helping our senders to kind of just have more requirements, but I think they're actually trying to be more forthcoming. Right? They've got bounce messages now that are new, that are much more specific, that truly help you understand what you're doing wrong. As Tobias mentioned earlier, like if the mail doesn't get delivered, you do get a bounce message back. And if the mail goes to the spam folder with Gmail, they have a message there that says, why is this mail going to spam? So I feel like, it's a good time for all of us that are sending, because we have the ability to actually just use the data that's at hand to be able to make changes. But they're just, the world is coming together in a way. I think we're all trying to kind of do right by email and do right by recipients. And I feel like that's a change that I'm seeing, where everyone is truly like a community that's trying to work together and then trying to pass that message out to the senders, because you folks that are all in the room care a lot about email and you're trying to send it right, but I think there's a lot of folks who don't even know how email works. They're like, oh, IP warming, I can't send million messages on the first day from a cold IP. Like, that is genuinely just not something that they've ever had to worry about. So I think our challenge here is just to bridge the gap between all the knowledge that we have, but making that super simple for senders and for recipients to just not have to think about email, to just actually enjoy the experience and the content. And we should all use our data to really understand who to send to and when and why.
I think for me, don't do the bare minimum. It's going to constantly be evolving, especially with the Yahoo and Google stuff. A lot of people seem to have a real struggle to get to what is very clearly the starting point, and I think they're done with the race. It's going to be a continually changing landscape, and there's going to be more changes coming. And on the flip side of that, it sounds like there's still a lot of people really struggling as smaller senders out there, especially the SocketLabs, the mom and pop stuff. So I'm trying to figure out the balance of making email better, because I think overall that's what we all want, and trying not to ruin a certain amount of people's lives is still the main thinking point for a lot of it.
I think, my perspective, I've been working in the DMARC space for the last several years, and I was looking to see if Microsoft was going to roll out the center requirements at Mog or outside of Mog and publish them, which they didn't. But I think we expect that to happen at some point, very similar to Google and Yahoo's requirements. And if Microsoft requires that for consumer domains, as well as maybe even Office 365, it's really going to make sure senders are complying with things that were best practices in the past and now are specific written requirements. LB, I think you're going to.
I would actually say what I've seen with inbox placement testing across numerous clients is that Microsoft has actually been a good bit more strict with spam folder and emails that are failing DMARC. I think they just haven't really made an announcement about it, which I can understand, because there's always this battle of, you don't want to reveal too much about how any security system works, lest, malicious actors use that information to find a way to game it. So, but actually, I mean, because they added that comp auth parameter, I want to say a few years ago back. And that was kind of their way of giving an estimation of, even if this person doesn't have DMARC, do we think this message kind of would, pass or not? And yeah, I actually think Microsoft has been pretty stringent, because I think they're a bit stingier with their server budgets, as far as like how much mail they want to store. I mean, that's kind of what I always tell people sending like B2B mail. It's like, yeah, they reject a lot of mail. It costs money to store that mail. Typically, the person administrating the spam filter is probably responsible for that mail server storage budget. So they have an incentive to reject your mail if it doesn't look like stuff people actually want to receive.
Just to second that on the data, we also are seeing stuff in our data that shows actually that Microsoft has kind of been treating authentication a bit more harshly since like before Google and even announced their thing. I would say, I think it was back in September that we saw this. So imagine you've got a whole bunch of 3 different sender domains that are all chugging along. They've got open rates about 50-60%. All of a sudden, Microsoft started enforcing, and you see the one that was not properly authenticated drop to like 5%, 6%. We got them to fix that very quickly, and a couple of days later, you see it return exactly to where it was, just the same level as the other one. So I think we're seeing it. Just because I didn't put it on the wall doesn't mean that they're not doing it. I've heard from these folks that they've been doing it for years and years. I think we're a little spoiled right now that they're actually giving us so much information. I hate to say.
I tend to think of those sender requirements as you can't go wrong abiding by what Google and Yahoo have published. It's not going to, it's going to serve you well in every other mailbox that you're sending mail to, in my mind. Just thinking about measuring compliance with Google and Yahoo's requirements, are the brands that you were working with, probably similar to some of the brands in the room with us today, are they still struggling with compliance with Google and Yahoo, and or what tools are available to them to monitor their compliance? Is Google post message rules, for instance, is that friend, foe, frenemy, or how are you using that? How are you helping your clients stay in compliance with these requirements?
Yeah, I think knowledge is still a big problem for a lot of the individual senders, right? But the tools are excellent. How we're handling it, yeah, Postmaster tools, trying to enforce an entire network of people to set it up individually is kind of tricky, but we're getting there. We also partnered with Sift to kind of help folks out with the DMARC question when they didn't really, well, here you go.
Yeah, so I definitely second Google Postmaster tools has been helpful to a lot of people. I know there's some weirdness in the data, so I would say to get the decently heavy grain of salt. Other tools, like I know there's a lot of ESPs that do tend to kind of have smaller and medium-sized businesses that do not have a lot of folks that have authenticated yet. I think those folks tend to wait until they feel the pain of not going to the inbox and then they rush. They're trying to get there. I think there's a tool that some people are using called Go Entry or just Entry, ENTRI. We'll look that up. But yeah, they found that very helpful because it just sort of helps facilitate the shift from getting your authentication set up. But also for About My Email, it's a tool from Steve Atkins from Word to the Wise. It's kind of like the compliance dashboard from Google Postmaster. It's on crack in a good way. So yeah, if you're having any issues, want to troubleshoot, and this one actually, I think Marcel Becker from Yahoo actually went into Slack group and said this is legit. If you're passing, you're probably good. So.
Spam House also lists to it.
There you go.
So Spam House, the issues, they say, use this tool to help you find most of your problems before talking to us if they're technologically challenged.
About My Email is free.
Yeah, it's totally free tool. Talking about not free tools, I would say, I think one approach that I've kind of been taking to drive DMARC adoption is really with IT. Because I think that DMARC, and especially these requirements from like Google and Yahoo and de facto Microsoft, even though they've not really announced it, I mean, I think it essentially like centralizes control of use of the domain and the email channel with IT or whoever controls the keys to the DNS castle. Which, please never share those credentials. I've had people just like, throw them at me in clear text, asking for help with their DNS. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, please no. It's like you just, flashed me. I'll like be like, all right, I use these to fix your DNS. Now go change your password because it's been compromised because I have it. But I think DMARC is huge and being able to just keep a map of all your traffic. I think it's a universal benefit for senders to implement DMARC, especially with good reporting, a good tool for like Redshift, on DMARC, easy DMARC. There are plenty of options out there. And it's really just about finding the one that's going to be the easiest for you to work with and has the feature set that you need. But yeah, I think that the other thing is I would say, yeah, there are tools like Entry out there as well as Cloud Valid that massively reduce the friction of implementing DNS changes. If you're an ESP, if you want to talk about integrating that, I've been playing with those tools for a little minute. Happy to discuss like the pros and cons, but they're even good for consulting teams because you can package up DNS changes like behind a URL and then all the user has to do. This is super helpful for smaller businesses. All the user has to do is basically provide their credentials for their DNS host and it will auto apply whatever changes you queued up for them. I think that's a way to reduce the friction there, but the other free tool I would say everybody has access to check your authentication status is Gmail's like Show Original. Have somebody send you an email to a Gmail address, click the three-dot menu, go to Show Original. That's got a super awesome UI that just tells you SPF passed on this IP, DKIM passed on this domain, DMARC passed or failed. Simple as that.
Yeah, man.
I have a quick question. So the previous panel, we're talking about the Google Yahoo requirements. You guys are talking about DMARC. I feel like a lot of companies are just sticking in just whatever their ESP or their whatever knowledge is out there in the internet. How would you convince people to, or ESPs, or maybe small shops that don't have the knowledge about DMARC and deliverability to not only follow the bare minimum, but actually, because one of the main benefits of DMARC, like we were saying, I think Tobias and Alex were saying, is knowing the good traffic from the bad traffic. So you stand out as a good sender, you will get rewarded by separating your traffic. So how do you, the small mom and pop shops or the small businesses, how do you convince them to go into enforcement when they may not know any of the technical terms that we may be talking about?
I think it's very challenging because we're sort of stuck with this education issue. Like I can admit that for about the first 5 years I had heard about DMARC, it was like an ice cream headache for me, and I was like, I don't need to learn this yet. And I kind of just would like walk away from it until I had to. But I think that's like, we need to remember that these folks are not technical. Like they're having a hard enough time just kind of sending emails, just being able to kind of get it together, right? So whatever we can do to make it helpful, I think is important. But I feel like a lot of the platforms that I've been talking to, especially the ones with small and medium-sized businesses, like they don't want to inundate their support teams. So they're kind of like, we need to keep the bar somewhere in the middle, because if we raise it and then all of a sudden we're saying, everybody go to P equals quarantine, woohoo, they're just gonna have so many questions from people, right? Even just the implementation, our support team sometimes will hop on the phone with people and they spend 30 or 45 minutes with them because it's just, they're like really like bumbling around and trying to get set up, right? It's very challenging. So I don't have any good answers. I hope you guys do, but I think it really is just like, how do we make it as easy as possible? Like drop the why necessarily. It's just like, it's good for your brand. It's going to help you reach the inbox. Like security is important. Trust is important, but does a mom and pop care about that necessarily? It's really about like, I need to send emails. Maybe it's an invoice. I need it to go to the inbox. Right? So I need to get that to happen.
Yeah, the carrot's really hard in this instance. Like these are complex problems for what are, for the most part, simplistic companies. Sometimes the state works really well, right? Like that's why, Google was successful. The state was, your revenue will be severely impacted. And that's ultimately what small businesses care about. They barely have IT teams, they barely have concepts of like technical understanding. It's really difficult for them. Like I hate to be that guy, but like the punitive aspect works really successfully for the most part, and more of that is probably gonna help.
I would say since I'm I'm a consultant and not like with a platform, I've got a little bit more latitude. So I think for me, it's about meeting people where they are and like extending them like, hey, do you know how to edit your DNS? If not, I'll hop on a Zoom and help you with that. And Faisal, I think you touched on something that is probably my absolute biggest pet peeve that I'm seeing right now. There are platforms out there. I don't know, I'm really tempted to name and shame, but I probably won't. You can hit me up after and I will definitely name and shame. But you know, they're like, they require DNS delegation and then they're putting DMARC reject with no reporting addresses on people's subdomains, which, hey, guess what? That breaks your parent domain DMARC reporting, or it breaks that subdomain off from getting any DMARC reporting in the tool. I had a client on board recently. I think they're using a DMARC platform. They were paying primarily for the volume they were sending out of this ESP engaging in this practice and getting 0% of that data in their DMARC tool due to the records that the platform, the ESP had deployed for them. Or even seeing there's some platforms that are just telling people to put, yeah, like a DMARC, policy none with no reporting address. I think that's horribly irresponsible. And they're also like not even checking to see if people have a functional DMARC record. But I think it's about meeting people where they are. And I think it's about adjusting the level of information you provide to adapt to your audience, right? And it's also about building trust. Like as a consultant, I think we have a lot more opportunities to like build trust with the customer. And it's just kind of like, if they trust you, that you know what you're talking about and you're like, hey, you need to do this. Generally, they'll typically do it, especially if you go and meet them where they are.
I think you made a great point earlier about partnering with your IT team. So a lot of times those of us that are working on marketing mail streams, we can tend to operate in a bit of a silo. We have our subdomain that's devoted to our marketing mail. And we're not really thinking so much about the top level domain, but there are rewards available to you if you do all this hard work of implementing authentication DMARC, things like BIMI, right? That do require DMARC enforcement on the top level domain. But it is a way to get IT involved in your work. The challenge is most folks in marketing have no clue what's going on at the top level domain, what all the other mail streams are that you send, Salesforce, Zendesk, Marketo, all these other mail streams that marketing doesn't really look after. Your IT team may not even look after them either. They may be more focused on the email gateway that sends your corporate mail, but having that partnership with IT will allow you to leverage fun stuff like BIMI with VMCs. And there's an innovation that you may have heard about that Google recently announced, kind of a companion to what's called verified mark certificates, and it's called common mark certificates. And I was going to ask the panel what they've heard about this. Do they think it's going to be something that their customers want to use? And I know David will have a great opinion on this too. So we'll start with them.
Point of clarification, that's a indie group announcement. Google's just the first.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Somebody in this room is involved in the authenticators working group.
I honestly just had a quick comment about the last thing as far as making friends with IT. I originated in the IT side of the house. We love cookies. I cannot tell you the benefits of just go take a box of cupcakes or cookies to your support team, your IT team. You'll be in like flip.
I can bribe your IT. I know what you're talking about. I have historically been very
Receptive cookies?
cold. Yeah, receptive cookies. Very cold on the idea of BIMI. I've often felt like it's kind of a little bit pointless to me. I will say you changed my mind a little this morning. You talked about it really nicely and eloquently, and I thought that was a pretty good way to put it. And again, like I think the stick works pretty well, but if the card BIMI works for things, like sure, let's go for it. Yeah.
Honestly, I think that the most compelling case that I ever heard for BIMI came from my mother-in-law. She has a Yahoo mailbox. She's had it like forever. And Bimmy was instantly intuitive to her. And that is how she's like, oh yeah, when I see the logo and it's got the like, I think the green ring around it, she's like, I know that's a legitimate email from Costco, from Walmart, from whoever. I think honestly, you know, one of the questioners was speaking earlier about the elderly users that, you know, have the majority of the disposable income. Like, I think for them, it's very easily intuitive that it's like, oh, that logo's there, it's lit up. I know that's legitimate email. It's just a really quick, easy visual identifier.
And the adoption is still such that it is more unusual to see a Bimmy logo than not still, so.
I think CMC will help a lot with that. I think it's gonna make the process a lot easier because I definitely think the process of getting the VMC and getting the trademark has been the huge holdup. So if anybody's got thoughts on how to speed that pipeline up, that'd be fantastic.
Question?
I think I'm close enough that you can hear me, but I guess for everyone else. Right. We're both a B2C and B2B company, but my question is specifically on B2B deliverability and specifically on the content within those email messages. In terms of what you're seeing and what best practices you could maybe share with us or the audience to help increase deliverability of B2B messages, knowing who likely is the server platform, I guess that's that our customers will be using to get that email.
Yeah, so I mean, I think B2B filters are definitely more strict, a little bit, yeah, they're kind of taking a closer look, so I feel like it's the more things you can do right, the more clear you can make your authentication and just like who you are as a sender. I think it's really important to not have like all image events, things like that, like it's more straightforward you can be, I think the better. I don't know if you folks have any more technical.
I've also heard like avoid specific words, right? Like no, okay,
Yeah.
that doesn't work.
There might be something vague somewhere that's still relying heavily on that, but I don't think so. B2B email is hard, but I think somebody touched on this earlier, right? There's resources at play for a lot of inbound receivers that don't want their employees hogging resources with a bunch of marketing email. Seriously, one-on-one email works really well. Not every use case is going to be perfect for like bulk mail, and sometimes personalized email actually works so much better, or things that at least appear to be personalized email. I mean, I can say.
I've got a little bit to add on that. I would say that security is a huge thing. You need to make sure your security is very hardened because that is going to be important to establishing trust with the major mailbox providers. I would say, you know, really in B2B, the main three filters you're going to be dealing with are going to be Office 365, Google Workspace, and then Proofpoint. And then there are also other filters like Mimecast and Barracuda. I think one very important thing to keep in mind is IP space. What IP space are you sending from? Because many of those spam filters are highly configurable. You may be able to get through the out-of-the-box version, but what if somebody checks that newsletter rule that blocks anything that looks like a newsletter or anything that comes from a known bulk like IP space, for, you know, that's known for sending promotional mail. So I think that can be really important, but I would say security is going to be like the absolute biggest thing, and also just being polite to their servers. Like if you don't have, I've had people in the past, you know, they were targeting like 100 people at the same company. I'm like, it's almost impossible your message is relevant to all 100 of those people. So being very selective about who you're sending to and not burdening their server with storing a bunch of mail. And I would say probably go light on the images because especially Outlook in general is probably going to suppress them. Not to say don't have them, but you know, you want to be cognizant of how your email is going to look if images get suppressed.
I have more of a comment than a question related to Bini and the new CMC, and that is still doesn't scale very well in Europe because while American brand will worry about their .com and possibly .ca in Canada, the European brands usually have domain per country, and that's where the cost of trademark is suddenly nothing, right? In Europe, getting a trademark is fairly easy, fairly cheap, so 1,500 euros more or less. You can do it even as a small business. You don't need lawyers for that. It's cheap, right? But if you're on 30 markets, even when you're a large brand, it becomes expensive. It becomes a significant chunk of the marketing's budget, because this is not coming out of brand budgets. This is coming from the email budget. And we have a massive customer that has 30 domains. That's 20,000+ euros from the email marketing budget. So it still has ways to go, and I guess that's more, about the general adoption and getting the price down.
So I mean, those prices, just so we're clear, those prices are set by the CAs.
Yeah. I mean, of course.
Yeah.
I'm not blaming you.
Yeah,
And maybe they should be real donuts like .coms.
yeah, I think what Jacob's talking about is the subject alternative name, the SAN you have to buy with a VMC today to display your logo on another domain. It's like 500 US, I think, usually a year. So yeah, for your client with 30 different domains, that's real money. I think it's fair to say the working group probably wants to see more adoption of VMCs, more adoption of CMCs. Part of that would see more CAs getting in the game, driving prices down potentially. I think the pricing I've seen for the common mark certificates that does not require a trademark, I think DigiCert was saying $99 a month US, was that $11.88 a year. Trust hasn't come out with their pricing. My guess is it'll be slightly lower than DigiCert because they're slightly lower on the VMC side. That's still a lot, right? It's not trivial. Maybe if you're a large brand, it's not excessive when you look at the other digital marketing spend that you have, but I'd love to see the CMC pricing come down. I think why it is so high is the CAs have to validate still. They basically go through the same steps they do to validate your VMC in terms of having an interview with you at the very end on video where you say, yeah, I own this domain. Yes, I own this logo. I've used it in email for the last year or whatever. That process is still going to be the same for CMCs as VMCs. So I think until they figure out a way to automate that issuance process for CMCs, the price is still going to be higher than we'd like to see. Matt, did you have,
a question and a comment. I mean, if I'm a brand and just imagine I do everything right, I've got my domain sheets in a row, I set up SPF, DKIM, DMARC, strict alignment on both SPF and DKIM. So I've got everything in a row, best practice, 100% achieved. And then me as a brand, I want to achieve billing. Up to that point where I implemented DMARC and I've got everything on P equals projectile, I've done everything. I got high trust on their buyers. And then I just want to have that icon in my DNS record. I'm not trusted before I do not get that that certificate. Isn't that ridiculous? How does it work out? Why am I trusted up to that point where I implemented all the stuff in the DNS? And suddenly when I want to put in my own DNS, my own icon, there's suddenly that momentum in the whole environment. Are you really the one you pretend to do? Yes, I am. I did everything I needed to do in the DNS.
So I can answer that one. It's largely because if I put my black hat on for a moment, I could spin up a domain, I could perfectly align everything. And then I can put probably whatever, if there were no VMC, if there were no CMC, if there were no one verifying, I can put any image I want in there, which means I could spoof, whatever brand I wanted.
Why should I do it as a brand? So if I'm Adidas, I think everybody knows Adidas or Reebok or Nike. Nike are being more in North America. Why should Nike just put the logo of Adidas into their DNS records when they've done everything
Well,
in the DMS.
It's not Nike or Adidas, it's, like I said, I put my black hacker hat on. The problem is with malicious actors, threat actors, that would, like I said, they could, get a cousin domain or something of Adidas. And then they could, have everything perfectly aligned, they could establish that trust with the mailbox providers. But they're not actually part of the Adidas organization. It's because hackers ruin everything for everyone forever. It's kind of the welcome to why email's hard.
Also, change that brand from Nike or a shoe company to PayPal, and you can imagine that would be pretty scary. You could have a lot of phishing campaigns that way.
Well, one thing I would note, you can publish a video record without a VMC or a CMC, not everyone shows it. Some mailbox providers will show it if you have a good enough reputation.
Just in terms of, because it's a verified certificate verifying the trademark. That's why the ISPs are putting the little green circle around the logo, and that's what's making it more believable to somebody's grandmother or whatever. And that's what's giving it sort of that more, giving it more force behind it, making it more trustworthy, as opposed to just put a favicon on the site of trust.
Has anyone in the room watched Bimmy with our certificate? Handful of people? Okay. Did you run into any challenge? You run into? Yeah, so you ran into challenge.
What?
You were into some challenge.
Yeah.
I just wanted to speak from a sender's perspective. And I think a lot of people in the room understand that from a brand and piggybacking on Jake's point. So if you're a sender of any size, you're not usually thinking about being spoofed. You're not thinking about bad actors. You're thinking about budget. You're thinking about the ROI, right? So a lot of our brands have rolled out Bimmy. They're like, we're not seeing it reflected. We're not seeing any uplift on our engagement against our local benchmark. So a lot of education is still needed to justify in their mind, and why should we spend resources and budget to do this, right? And part of that discussion is for scenarios that may or may not happen. Well, they find that hard to digest too. So I think the dialogue needs to continue, and we need to speak their language about it.
It's a great point. Don't take our word for it, right? Test it. If you have a large portion of your customer base at Yahoo addresses, as Matt said, you can test Bimmy without a VMC, assuming you comply with Yahoo's other requirements around mail volume and sender reputation. But you're right. Give it a shot and see if it works at Yahoo. It's harder to measure response these days after Apple mailbox privacy protection. But if you're working with an ESP or an agency or a consultant, they can help you figure out how to measure the response from Bimmy. Yeah, Jacob.
Yeah, we resell for interest, and we see marketers being interested in Bimmy and often coming, we want Bimmy, we want the BMC, but they don't have a Bimmy record in place. They haven't tested it. And often their biggest struggle is to create the SVG in the first place, right? It may seem like it's an SVG, but then we're back and forth. Look, this is not an SVG. You have an SVG bitmap. It doesn't meet any of the criteria of the standard, etc. We end up helping them recreating their logo, and then we do the test. We just want to see that it shows up in Yahoo. If it doesn't show up, your reputation is probably not there. You have a problem. We ask Yahoo, reach out, can you see the brand? How's it doing? And after it shows up in Yahoo, you can say, okay, now you're ready to spend your money. Otherwise, it's just a waste of it.
Yeah, I just want to give a plug. Matt has a really awesome video on emailkarma.net that walks through how to create your SVG record. So if you're working with any customers that need help with that, other suggestion, it's probably just a few bucks on Fiverr to get somebody to sort that out for you as well.
Yeah, I love Billy, mentioned that, actually, Matt helped me with our SVG. Actually have no problem with the alignment with the BMCs, but why is it an annual cost? I mean, you're every year for this
I get it, the upfront cost, and everything's working, your reputation's there. You know, you've been sending for a year, it's been fine, why have to pay this a year?
That's how digital works. Certificates work on an annual basis.
You know, they provide the continued assurance, but
Typically, they're not here to defend themselves, so.
yeah,
I will answer the question very much if you would like, but, so part of the reason that came about was, 4 or 5 years ago, the browsers decided that search could no longer exist for longer than 390 days. So that extends into the BIM certificates as well. It is not it's not like a BIM or a CA decision. My understanding is it came from the browsers and has to do with the integration of those certificates. So
I think they're providing the continued trust because, I mean, there could be a brand that goes through bankruptcy or something, and maybe they get picked up by like a less than legitimate business organization or something like that. I mean, it's possible that the certificate issuing authority might want to revoke that certificate. But I mean, I think I would agree that I think it should probably be like, okay, there's a higher cost the first year, and then the subsequent years, you're really just paying for that like ongoing assurance. So definitely there are some barriers to BIM that probably still need to be worked through before it sees wider adoption. But I can just say among some of the, like I said, more elderly constituents, like, you know, people in their 75 and stuff, they definitely get it. They definitely get it. And they're also kind of the folks that are on Yahoo, and as Jacob was pointing out, like you could test and see if it works there, because I don't think Yahoo requires the BMC. I think that's mostly Google.
Also, to this point, CAs are actually re-verifying the companies, the organizations, and the domains. So I think the costs, the initial costs and the re-verification costs will be very much the same.
All right, we got a lot of baby talk, we're going to talk. We only have 5 minutes left, so if there's any, deliverability question, I'll take it, otherwise I have one, if you have a baby question.
I have a non-BIM
Talk to, or non-site, well, if you have a baby question, we talk to Alex and I from the baby group at lunch, Alex is sticking around. Or Brian or Jacob also are very first. So from a delivery question, I have one.
Okay.
For each of you. What is the #1 most common repetitive deliverability task you're currently working on with multiple customers? Go.
Y'all want me to go?
Davis first. You're at the left. You go first. Oh, I'll be then.
Oh, sorry.
She beats you.
You wanna go first? All right, oh gosh, honestly, I'm like, hold on.
Just one, I'll be.
Content. Oh my gosh, content, please stop sending all image emails, people. It is not the 90s anymore, or the early 2000s, and honestly, insecure links. That's the content, that's the biggest thing I'm seeing, keeping senders out of the Gmail inbox recently.
I missed your question. Was the question, what's the most common thing saying or doing?
Like, what's the most common issue you're fixing?
Oh, most common issue I'm fixing?
Or saying, I guess, it's not relevant.
Yeah, just reputation problems, right? I tell a lot of people, which I probably shouldn't be from an ESP, send way less email, right? Send less, better email. I think I say that 10 times a day at a minimum, so.
I feel like the one I get the most is like trying to figure out if they're going to spam or not. And I think it's one of those, like, we are all just like, yeah, right, I'm not going to spam, everything's good. And like, you're looking for that positive confirmation that you're in the inbox. And you're sort of overlooking all of the signals that we're actually getting right now that are telling you otherwise, right? So I think I was dealing with somebody recently who they're like, hey, we got this notification that, you know, mail went to a spam folder for a customer. When we dug in, we saw lots of spikes in the Google Postmaster Tools complaints. There were messages that were in this person's spam folder as well from that brand that said that the reason it's going to spam was because of a lot of user complaints. There's a third signal that I can't remember, but it was like one of those, they have all these signals and then not the open rates, right? The open rates are supposed to drop. The thing that I had wanted to suggest to them was to look at their open rates over time at the destination level. So like compare your Google versus Hotmail versus all the other destinations that you're sending to, and look for if there's like one that's low or if you're low across the board to try to kind of figure that out. A lot of folks don't think about that, or your platforms make it incredibly hard for you to see that information. So I'm not going to suggest you all just jump into Excel and do some pivot tabling, but like I think it's important to kind of try to, even just every once in a while, do that deeper dive when you see a problem. Don't just look for the confirmation bias of like, I think I'm fine, like get ahead of it, because if you're going to the spam folder, you're just gonna keep going to the spam folder. So it's one people are kind of like, I don't know, but there are signals there, we just gotta.
Just the flip side of that too, a lot of people don't understand how individualized spam filtering is. Like they're like, hey, I've got a report, I'm going to spam, it's one person, chill, it's probably fine. Look at the other overall data, like Lauren said, you know. There's not enough education out there for smaller centers that, hey, this isn't a one size fits all. What's happening from one address, it's based on that. So.
Just to wrap up, just super quick, because a lot of times when you work in deliverability, you feel like you're the no fun police, right? You're always saying no to things that your customers want to do. But what are some fun things you think are in the offing? Is it AI and email? Is it something else? What do you see as opportunities for marketers in the very near future to be creative, have some fun with the programs, and not have the fun police come down really quick?
AI is cool, right? Like AI is such an annoying buzzword, and for the most part, it's all bullshit, right? But what a lot of AI in email actually does is force people into best practices without them knowing. Like you can use data to make sure you're sending relevant to people who actually care. That's excellent. Like I love that. It does a lot of the work I want to do for me. Lets me concentrate on the more interesting problems.
Good one. I think some of the interactive elements that are easier to do now are super helpful because like, we keep talking about how you should send the right email to the right person and make it really great. But that's what mailbox providers are saying too. And that's what everyone should be saying, but it's more, we're making it easier for people to engage if it's possible. Earlier in the ISP and they were talking about the different generations and how, what was it, Gen Z doesn't scroll, but the boomers do. So when you can think about that and just sort of figure out like, does my audience like interactive things? And if so, that is going to boost your engagements, right? So you're going to have more engagement through emails. That's going to help your deliverability. But I think you got to dig into the data. You need to understand your customer base. You should talk to customers. I think a lot of times, especially the folks sitting in our seat are very well behind the scenes. We're like an escalation point from support or something. We don't get to talk to customers enough. So we don't understand. Like, I think that's, I'm a chief marketing officer now. I get to be the troublemaker who sends the emails, but I used to give recommendations. Say your list and do this and look at these things. And our platform didn't support that and make it very easy for them. And so like they're like, that sounds great on the call. And then I'm angry because they haven't implemented it. Other folks are, their side, they're angry because they're like, you didn't fix my problem. And like neither of us wins. So I think it's really coming, you said it's really like coming to the table, meeting them where they are, and then working from there.
I'm honestly really hype on RI instead of AI, which I just call regular intelligence. My biggest advice for people would be use the data that you have access to. I would say that's the number one missed mark I see for the majority of brands I work with is they have a ton of data. Email generates a metric crap ton of data that the vast majority of brands do absolutely nothing with. And I think there's just really basic statistical analysis, like Lauren was talking about earlier. Yeah, break down and look at your mailbox, look at your performance by mailbox provider. If you have a substantially lower open rate at one mailbox provider versus another, you probably have an issue because just like David was talking about, spam filtering is very individualized, and like Yahoo and Microsoft and Google and Comcast and AT&T, they all take they all are trying to achieve a similar goal, but they all take somewhat different approaches to it. So I think using the data that you actually have, because data should really be treated, especially data containing PII, which email address counts as that, it should be considered a toxic asset, which means if you're not actively getting value from it, you should not be hanging on to it. You shouldn't even be collecting it. So I think that's a big decision a lot of businesses need to make is either, just don't even collect that data or actually start doing something with it. And like the opportunity for analysis starts at like really basic.